Hi, Matthew.
How you doing, Jackie?
Good, although the UN's not doing so well. So why don't we start off, since you have to be at a press conference really soon, let's start off talking about Haiti. And I thought, the UN death toll, I meant to look up the most recent numbers. It's over 60 now. Can you tell us anything about... people are talking about this as Ban Ki-moon's Katrina moment. You may know some of the people. I
know many of them. I guess I thought the way to do this, and also this will be a bit briefer than normal. It's an impromptu press conference called on short notice about the U.S.'s contribution to the UN. They're trying to say that unlike the previous administration, they're funneling much of their aid through the UN. But first, as to the facts, I was actually here at the UN the day the earthquake struck. Although Ban Ki-moon now accused of treating it like Katrina, which they take a big issue with, he wasn't here that night, but his top peacekeeping officials were, and they did spring into action. That what really sort of put obviously it's a much wider tragedy. I'm going to I'll focus on the UN piece of it first, but that's not obviously saying that there's not the prime victims here are Haitian people living in homes and many of them not really getting dug out if they were still alive and other things. But the UN had its headquarters in a rented hotel in Haiti called the Christopher Hotel. It was actually, I looked into it earlier, it was being rented from a Haitian doctor for $94,000 a month.
Wow.
And this building collapsed during the earthquake. It was about just after 5 o'clock there. So the idea is that some staff had already left for the day, but others, including the head of the UN mission, Hedi Anabi, a Tunisian diplomat.
And the number two.
And his number two, a Brazilian, and the head of the Performed Police Unit. I mentioned Mr. Anabi because he was in the process of meeting with as luck would as fate would have it, with a senior Chinese delegation about the Chinese peacekeeping presence in Haiti. And the Chinese delegate, I guess and people know what the outcome was, but the UN became very, as it was described to us today, Ban Ki-moon was trying to reach Mr. Anabi. They went days without saying that these senior officials had probably died in the building. The Chinese quickly dispatched the search and rescue mission. Unbelievably quickly. It left China 3 hours after the earthquake.
Now, was the Chinese search and rescue the very first SAR team to arrive on the
They
on
were.
the scene? By
all accounts, they were, which I at the time I found very strange to get a team from China. But, they're pretty open that I don't want to undermine it. Just if without knowing more, you'd say it shows them to be the fast, the quickest draw in the humanitarian world. I think the reality is and no one has yet really plumbed the depth of how senior that delegation was. It seems strange, but there were some pretty senior, Chinese police. This is going to sound to you, I'm sure, conspiratorial, but the Chinese peacekeepers in Haiti is a 125-member formed police unit, meaning they don't really serve under anyone else's command. They arrive as 125, they patrol themselves, and they're a riot squad. They actually, I found and published a photograph of them being flown from Urumqi in Uyghur Xinjiang autonomous region, which obviously is a region of China which has some unrest.
Not to go down this tangent, but are the Chinese peacekeepers in Haiti, are they Uyghurs?
They're not. They're a Chinese, predominantly Han force that had previously served in Xinjiang, essentially putting down Uyghur riots.
Are they speaking French in Haiti? Or are they just...
They don't speak French, these guys. That's my understanding. Some may. The idea is that it's very strange how peacekeeping works. They have something called formed police units, which means that a squad shows up and serves under its own command and will be deployed to spots to sort of put down unrest. I only say this because it's kind of, obviously after the earthquake, everything is just sort of, purely humanitarian, and it's not the right time to analyze how the peacekeeping mission
Well, just to get back to the search and rescue issue, are we positive, do you know for a fact that, because there are U.S. search and rescue teams at the UN site now and all over the place, but you know for a fact that it was a Chinese search and rescue team that was put into the air, obviously quickly because they had people on the ground there, meeting with the Haitian with the senior UN command there. But you know for a fact it was a Chinese search and rescue team that first reached UN personnel.
Yes, they were, and the UN even said it. In fact, they sort of misspoke initially and said that the Chinese had already arrived, and this was literally like 11 hours after the earthquake. So I spoke to the Chinese ambassador. He's like, no, they're on their way. They're flying through Vancouver. They were the first on the scene. Now, there was some criticism, and I don't like to only. I just what I look at is sort of how the efforts are going. There was some criticism that upon their arrival, openly their focus was to look for their own people, which maybe is understandable. And I'm sure, I've been on these conference calls of USAID from Haiti, and they're constantly, obviously at this point, saying, we don't care the nationality of the people we look for. But I think maybe initially, obviously a country is going to be most attuned to looking for its own nationals. The Chinese went into the rubble of the Hotel Christopher looking essentially for this collapsed room from the third floor where its officials had been meeting with Mr. Anabi. Again, and this is sort of a mixed critique and kind of rest in peace. Many UN staff, as you said, the number they've confirmed so far is 61, but the number is going to
it's going to be over 100 or approximately.
There's 100 missing and 61 that they've confirmed is dead. A staff member who used to be here in UN headquarters, Alexander Duguay, was in the building. Today. Yeah, and I think I will say this: I know several of the reporters who went down to Haiti on Sunday with Ban Ki-moon, and her boyfriend had pretty much complained that he didn't feel that the search had covered all areas of the buildings that collapsed. That it had been focused sort of in some areas of the building and not others. Sometimes people say things in the heat of the moment, but this and it's come up, and again they dug another issue that arose, and I'm not really sure how solid the number is because initially the UN was reporting only its international staff. You can go back and see that they put out a statement saying 18 Brazilians.
Right. I noticed that initially I saw a list of 30 people. That was a couple of days ago.
Yep.
Including the special assistant. There's an American. There are a couple of Americans on the list.
But I think the one thing to understand is that there, in Haiti they had, let's say, 7,000 peacekeepers, but the peacekeeping mission had some 490 international staff members, of whom Alexander Duguay and obviously the ones we've mentioned are some, and it also had 1,200 Haitian nationals that work for the mission. This is also true in the Congo, everywhere the UN is, they hire local people.
They hire local people.
Right. The irony is not the irony. The problem is that it's pretty open that these people are treated differently. They're paid less. Yes. Maybe that's understandable. But the even when they're doing sort of the same thing, they're paid less. In this case, it wasn't. The numbers they reported were the international staff, and then it took a long time to get the UN to say we'll go out and see if our national staff are alive in their homes. They tried to say, well, these people had left the building earlier, and they may have their own. They used the word grievance. I think they meant grievance.
You're breaking up just a little bit. I want to ask you whether the UN has established a special designated fund that people could contribute to for the support of family members, especially of these locally hired UN employees who, as you say, are not receiving anywhere near the same level of salary and benefits as UN staff based out of New York. Do you know of anything
That's a really
like
good idea. They, to my knowledge, they haven't, but I think that's something that I've been today. One of my tasks is to get to the bottom of. There is a UN sort of death benefit for families of those killed while working for the UN.
Right.
And it's my understanding that it's higher for international staff.
Do you know approximately what it is?
I actually don't. It's in Schedule D of the benefits package. I was told that today.
It would be interesting to find out. Maybe we could post it.
I'll try to do that.
Sometimes with some companies, it varies. Who knows? But it's often equivalent to sort of a multiple of your annual salary. So maybe it's like 3 times your annual. The idea, I think, is often to kind of give the deceased's family some breathing room in which to make other arrangements for income.
But you know what? I think that is something. I think within the UN, obviously, I'm just trying to cover it, but it would seem that in this case, with everything that's been said about the focus on Haitians and even the economy and whatnot, that this is one case where they might want to think of paying the same benefit to people rather than But one thing I wanted to say, and again, I'm sure everyone that sees this has seen a lot of stuff on TV, so I view this as sort of like a sort of an inside the UN supplement to stuff that's been covered, but. On a sort of higher profile, there's the idea of, President Obama announced $100 million immediate U.S. aid as a floor, not a ceiling. Mm-hmm. Here at the UN, I asked the U.S. the sort of Deputy Ambassador Alexander Wolf, would this be through the UN? Because the UN had requested, $562 million as a kind of a flash appeal. And initially he said he didn't know. The next day he said, the $100 million would not be through the UN, but there would be some separate thing through the UN. And then the mission clarified and said, no, $70 million out of the $100 million will be through the UN. Now, what that means is not entirely clear because what the UN says is it identifies needs. And if a country says, yes, we will fund that, whether or not it's a UN project or an NGO, if it's something that's on the UN's list, if the country asks for what it gives to be included in the UN's flash appeal, it will be. and I see there's 2:30 within minutes of when we're filming. There's a press conference quickly called by the U.S. Deputy Ambassador Wolf and the
It's because Bill Clinton is there.
He is here. He's not going to be at this 2:30 thing.
No, it's the 3 o'clock. There's 3 o'clock.
Yeah, there's a 3. And by the time you see it, it may be neither here nor there. But there's an enormous. One thing I noticed in looking at the UN's listing of contributions is that some countries have been much more either professional or aggressive, however you want to view it, in making sure that what they've done be listed by the UN. So, for example, the U.S.'s planes and search and rescue. The UN put a value on it, $36 million, U.S. FEMA, and it's listed on the UN website.
See,
Meanwhile, many other countries...
This is a really important point, I think, for people to kind of understand and for there to be a transparency and debate about. Because often when the U.S. gives aid in a crisis like this, it's in kind. And as you just pointed out, the UN puts a dollar figure on it based on a schedule of fees that the UN works out with I don't know who in the U.S. government, but the Defense Department has a price that it charges for airlift or transport of any kind, and so you're right that it's a way of sometimes governments kind of playing fast and loose with their aid.
Totally, and I think politically, not to be cynical, but when I looked at the numbers and having been here both under the Bush administration, I'm pretty clear that under the Bush administration, let's say in response to flash appeal to Cyclone Nargis or otherwise. The U.S. wasn't all that concerned whether the UN was aware of or included its contribution. They viewed it as something between themselves and their citizens, or themselves and the host government where the crisis took place. Here, there seems to have been a real and very quick desire on the U.S.'s part to get everything listed, such that as of last night, when I wrote an article on this topic, other countries would have a text description of 6 plane loads of supplies and a search and rescue team. That's, for example, from Brazil. No dollar value. Dollar value, 0. Now, obviously, through time, hopefully the UN will get it together and put a number on that. And I guess maybe it reflects that the U.S. is better than Brazil at putting a dollar value. But I do think that there's some, without being cynical, I think that there's some reason that they've done that. And I also know, having gotten a kind of a call from the U.S. mission, quickly making a correction to what Wolf has said and saying, don't name the spokesman, so I won't, but it showed a real micromanagement of how the sort of U.S.-UN relation is being portrayed in this. The same thing applies to the U.S. troops that are going down there. Many reporters have asked, and I think it's a kind of an obvious question. So if the UN is in charge of security in Haiti, and the U.S. is suddenly sending, thousands of soldiers, is the U.S. going to be serving under the UN flag at long last, as some would say?
I'm really glad you brought this up. Okay, so I wanted to. There's a lot to cover in the Haiti discussion, but one really interesting thing that's come up very quickly is fighting between. I love this, the United States and France over who's in charge, and because the U.S. got there and got the airport up and running, got air traffic control working, and was in charge of landing planes, and this kind of makes sense. The U.S. can do that really quickly. Yep. Clear a runway and start landing heavy transport planes with lots of goods inside of them, and they had to turn away an inflatable. A French plane carrying a big inflatable hospital, the kind that they deploy to disaster zones.
Médecins Sans Frontières, one of the best-known aid groups in the world, right. Doctors Without Borders, had at least 2 planes.
It was a French government plane, that was my understanding. Was it
carrying No, I think MSF? It was actually a Doctors Without Borders plane, but the French government immediately leapt on their complaints. They sent out by press release and said the U.S. had occupied Haiti, right? If we're referring to the same...
Right, I think we're referring to the same thing.
And
there was some great, money quote about, who's in charge here. Has the United States occupied Haiti? And, I think that this issue of U.S. I would say that there are very few countries who are equipped, like the United States is, to kind of quickly rise to the occasion in a disaster like this, get people on the ground and start setting up the infrastructure that you need to deliver support. Sure. So I think it's a shame that the French plane was turned away, but I'm thinking there probably was a reasonable explanation, and I understand the plane was able to land not long after.
I think it'd be good to hear what the explanation is. I think I have a lot of sympathy for Doctors Without Borders.
So you're...
I have a lot of sympathy for the NGO. I think that the French complaint absolutely was sort of using the incident to sort of assert the primacy of the international community, which is another way of France sort of raising its own profile.
Right.
And I think here's for the heady one. This is a pretty heady audience of blogging heads. So there's been an invocation by some, kind of cynically, of the Monroe Doctrine. And here's how: the U.S. has shown itself much more willing to collaborate, to sort of coordinate bilaterally with Canada, who's also sending a lot of troops to the towns outside of Port-au-Prince, and Brazil, which was the largest peacekeeping troop contributor to the MINUSTA UN mission. They've had direct talks in the way that they haven't with, let's say, the French. And with some, the scuttlebutt in the UN is it's sort of like, this is like rolling back the clock to an idea of like, this is in our hemisphere. The thing is that obviously, both because of the Obama...
But there's another backstory to all of this, right? Haiti was a French colony. And, one of the arguments that comes up in discussions of why is Haiti such a basket case country is it cut its ties too soon to France as its colonial power, should have waited another 100 years maybe, gotten a little more infrastructure built up, and they had to pay some kind of gold I don't know the whole story. I don't even know if this is all... But they had to pay some money and so this came up at the UN like a year ago. Haiti was demanding from France its money back. And France basically said, forget it. We give you $2 billion a year through the EU, and you're not getting a franc from us. Or a euro.
The U.S. has its own history in Haiti with an occupation with Marines.
Right.
The sort of, some in Haiti will say that the U.S., kidnapped Aristide and flew him out of the country. So there's a lot of...
Okay, so there's a lot of bedfellows here to make for awkward politics.
And I've noticed that the U.S. I guess I'll just source this to these calls they've been having daily for journalists from the USAID kind of people on the ground in Haiti. Obviously the calls are to some degree factual about, we've pulled X number of people out of the rubble. But I really have seen them as kind of political and saying, they try to... One thing I notice is that to the degree that they bring up the UN and praise anything, it's usually WFP, the World Food Program. They're like, we're giving all of our, rations of food through WFP. When pressed, this I thought was sort of one of the funnier incidents on these calls. A Brazilian journalist demanded of the American speakers, why have you not allowed the UN to run the operation on the ground? There's a Brazilian journalist. And the U.S. Guy, Colonel Callahan, said, wait, President Obama has spoken to Lula. As if the question were actually about Brazil. And I think that what I read into this is it's either Monroe Doctrine or this idea that some countries sort of sometimes use the idea of like, let the UN take charge. Maybe it should, and maybe that's the future of humanity or whatever, but it's used, I think in the case of France, saying let the UN do it is a way of saying give us more say and prominence than we would otherwise have. Not just in a world could be coordinated in such a way that like, each of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, whatever their actual, strength economically or otherwise, would have a say, and in which case France may not be the biggest responder to Haiti. But if you put the UN in charge, they could certainly, again, I don't want to put them down. They view themselves as the number one humanitarian country. They tried to, bomb Myanmar with cheese and food after the cyclone. So there's a whole other aspect to it.
I tried to put a dollar figure on how much aid France itself has directed toward Haiti. I didn't have enough time to research,
sure.
But
I
don't know. Maybe you can try to find that out.
I expect to see the UN site suddenly listing in great detail the French ones.
Yeah.
Here's a transition using France as I've heard that the most popular politician in France, the most popular public official who is French in France, is Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the head of the IMF. Actually, they had that on France 24 TV the other day. But he's the head of the IMF, and one thing that I think some of our viewers may have seen, and this is a UN agency but not UN question, is almost immediately after the hurricane, the IMF said, we're going to make a $100 million loan to help them. And then, NGOs and others who follow the IMF said, wait a second, your previous loan to Haiti had all kinds of conditions attached, including no rise for public sector employees, including raising the price of electricity. So they said maybe this loan with all these conditions might not be such a good thing. The IMF quickly backtracked and said this $100 million loan, they would ask their board to make it without interest and without conditions, and they would encourage others to cancel the debts of Haiti, which this is sort of the interesting part.
And that's looking like more and more like it's going to happen now.
I don't know. I was on this morning on the IMF's press briefing, and they acknowledged that, number one, it's up to the board, so they can't confirm that it will happen. They also described the the cancellation of debt as being a medium-range goal, i.e. less important than which obviously this is less important. But the kind of one interesting thing is that, number one, among the creditors is a UN agency, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. So I've asked whether that will be canceled. But the biggest bilateral donor is Venezuela, $290 million. And the second biggest is Taiwan, which is, this is getting a little bit far afield, but there was a dispute not long ago, maybe 2006, where China wanted to limit or even cancel the peacekeeping mission in Haiti. Why? Because Haiti had recognized Taiwan.
Right. All right, you've got to get going. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about a couple of other things
more
related to Haiti.
Yeah,
I want to talk about the
actual
Royal Caribbean thing, and I want to talk about David Brooks's op-ed, and I want to talk about the one thing I've learned from reading the book Game Change, which I did before I started reading it. And so you can text me.
We can talk Afghanistan and everything else.
We can
thanks a lot. I think at least we got something. We've got something in the can. There's a lot of moving parts here.
All right, so we'll talk as soon when you're done.
Okay, cool.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Hi, Matthew. We're back.
We're back.
So this is a little bit going to be interesting. This is the first time I'll have done a recording with all three children in the house and no other adult present. So if there's like a crash or a bang or something.
All right, definitely. Anyway. I'll try to
anyway,
be very soothing.
Before we get back into our discussion of Haiti and the UN's role and what's happening, I just wanted to mention that I am reading Game Change, and when I picked up this book, I thought, is there anything that I don't already know about the campaign that I'm going to read, that I'm going to get out of this book? And have you read it, by the way?
I have not. I'm so far inside this bubble that had it not been for this Haiti crisis, perhaps I would have. But I'll have to rely on you for now.
Okay. Well, the one thing, people will talk about the candidates, but to me, one of the interesting things that I've taken from the book is a very different portrait of Cindy McCain than emerged during the campaign, where she really came across as this kind of icy, aloof, brittle, remote country club wife in Arizona, and she's much more human in this. And ironically, the other candidate's spouse, who was seen as saintly, Saint Elizabeth Edwards, comes across as nightmare. And so I just find that interesting. And now Cindy McCain has added her name and her face to this campaign in support of marriage equality. And there's this really stunning photograph of her with silver duct tape across her mouth and the No Hate. It's the logo of this group, the opposing Proposition 8 in California, which only allows... which does not allow same-sex marriage. Anyway, it's just really interesting. So for that, I think, not for the other reasons too, but I wasn't expecting to read this book and come away thinking something different about Cindy McCain, and I have, and I think that I wanted to just mention that. But
sure. I actually maybe people will remember there was a pretty vicious New Yorker profile of Cindy McCain, unauthorized during the campaign. I remember that. Basically, the upshot was like, she's a junkie. It was like, but it was never confirmed. They didn't get her to speak. It just seemed like a needless...
Her history with prescription drug abuse was, I think, well understood. And there are other revelations about her in the book. Did she have an affair?
But the way it was done. I just remember thinking that piece was like, for all politics to the side. It was just like, please,
Yes, but anyway, I think what came through to me is that I just saw her somehow as a much more human person, passionately angry with her husband sometimes, swearing at him, having big fights in front of the staff. And it's funny because the Edwardses fought too in front of the staff, and yet somehow it comes across very, very differently in the case of Elizabeth Edwards, who I think also directed her anger toward the staff in a very high-handed way, whereas Cindy McCain, it's really all about her husband and her ambivalence about having to be in this campaign, which is completely understandable. So anyway, I just thought that was
no, sure. I'm that you lit a fire under me. I will definitely.
And there's of course like the Sarah Palin, stuff, and I'm sure other dialogues will talk about this. The only other thing I would just add about Sarah Palin, being having suffered from Sarah Palin obsession disorder. It's really clear when you read this account of how that part, the selection and vetting process unfolded, that they fell in love with this image of her that they developed. It's Steve Schmidt and other senior people in the campaign. And then they projected upon her all of these hopes and expectations in quite, really an unfair, inhuman way. There's no possible way that she could have been plucked from total obscurity and made to carry forth this enormous burden that they were placing on her based on very thin, superficial information about who she was. And, of course, she didn't have the knowledge, the self-knowledge or awareness to say no. That's, of course, Sarah Palin's problem. But it's just fascinating. It's almost like a human sacrifice. And that's effectively what they did. They chewed her up and spit her out. And I'm not defending Sarah Palin by any stretch, but I think it's important to kind of see both sides of that story.
Let me ask you one domestic political question, just to see whether you'll take her at it. Have you the controversy around Martha Coakley and not the whole campaign, only Red Sox Gate, where she referred to Curt Schilling as a Yankee fan?
Right.
Now, how do you take that?
Okay. I'm not a sports fan.
Okay.
But when you're a politician, man, you better become one. And if standing outside of Fenway Park shaking hands is something that doesn't appeal to you, you've got a problem.
Well, certainly don't make fun of others doing it. I meant, I think the way I understand it is somebody said to her, Rudy Giuliani's coming up to campaign, and she said, well, he's a Yankee fan. They said, well, Curt Schilling's against you, too. And she said, well, he's a Yankee fan. Well, he's like, probably, at least in recent times, the most famous Red Sox pitcher, the bloody sock, all of that.
Right.
The only thing is, I thought it was a slam dunk, that it showed her to be either so arrogant she didn't have to check her facts, or out of touch with the electorate, or whatever.
Well, all those
It was
things.
suggested to me last night that this was actually, that may be a sexist point of view, that to expect all politicians to be equally enamored of the bloody sock maybe. That's why I raised it to you. As I was wondering whether.
I remember that happening, and I remember being dismayed. I'm from Boston, so I was taken to Red Sox games as a little girl, and it's like a religion, but it's more than baseball. So
I don't know
you
how you
cannot be
could be
running
General.
for Senate and not know who the major players are. And anyway, so
have you heard the final theory on that? I think Curt Schilling has said that when he was a kid he was a Yankee fan. So some spinmeisters have tried to say she knew more than she let on.
Oh, right.
Or she lucked into that one.
I don't think so.
This will be one for the historians.
All right.
But I'm trying to think. I'll make this segue to you.
Okay.
We took a break from our. Maybe these will be spliced together so seamlessly. I think that my tie is off and whatever. But in terms of whatever you call it, continuity. But we took a break because Bill Clinton, none other than Bill Clinton, of whom many political books have been written, appeared at the UN alongside Ban Ki-moon to in his capacity as UN Special Envoy for Haiti.
Right.
And I think you're going to like this topic because among other pretty straightforward things about, let's raise funds, let's do cash for work, he said, pretty much unprompted, he praised the decision by Royal Caribbean Lines to continue to bring holiday seekers to the resort of Labadee.
Right.
As quickly as they did. And as I think you're aware, as I know you're aware, as you've made me aware, there's something of a controversy about holiday seeking in the midst of a deadly earthquake.
So this subplot, there are a couple of subplots to the Haiti disaster, and this subplot really fascinated me. The minute I heard Adam Goldstein, the CEO of Royal Caribbean, on NPR a couple mornings ago, I knew that I was listening to a case study in crisis PR unfolding. And as you may know, the Guardian wrote an article. Maybe I don't know who exactly prompted, but the Guardian did a big piece saying, what the heck is going on? There are people on zip lines 60 kilometers from the world's worst catastrophe. And what is Royal Caribbean thinking? And so I, of course, was like, what was Royal Caribbean thinking? And it was fascinating to hear the CEO go on NPR. And you can almost hear in Steve Inskeep's voice, he's thinking the same thing. I mean, he kind of keeps his journalistic, distance from it. But you can sort of hear the subtext in the interview. And he's like, come on, explain yourself. And after the whole interview, I thought, I would give this CEO a strong B for defending his business and explaining why they did what they did. His first talking point was, this is horrible, we're with Haiti, we're doing everything we can. And the government of Haiti asked us to come, and he explained how there are people who rely on their arrival at Labadie to braid hair and sell trinkets and whatever else they do. Mm-hmm. And he also mentioned that his company was the largest foreign direct investor in Haiti, which I wanted to fact check because I couldn't believe it was true.
I heard Bill Clinton was also praising Digicel, a cellular phone company run by an Irish businessman, as he was quick to point out.
My first thought was there's got to be a cell phone company that's invested more than $50 million in Haiti. But anyway.
Maquiladora. Many a garment shop is heading that way.
So,
no, but I mean, exactly. I don't mean to. You know what? It actually, when I heard Clinton say it, I ended up just writing a piece about it. I will put the link up. I don't mean to be facile. I mean, I know that there is an argument that, in fact, in a developing country, many developing countries have sort of, at least seemingly, at least some people in the country have picked themselves up through tourism. I think the idea here is that there's something kind of ghoulish about so recently after there's still people trapped in the rubble.
Right.
And one doesn't know how the revelers or holiday seekers are in Labadie
well,
acting.
I thought the reason I didn't give the CEO an A is that what I thought he should have said was, we're steaming to port, we're on our way, we're making our port call, we're bringing pallets of aid, we're donating $1 million to this NGO. All of the revenues from our port our activities are going to go. Our passengers, everyone's opening up their wallets and their hearts. So all of that was good. But then I thought that maybe they could have said, in light of this unfolding catastrophe, we're going to suspend the onshore recreational part of our program and maybe encourage people to belly up to the buffet back at the ship, or maybe attend to talk.
Only beer, no hard liquor.
I don't know. There's something. There was something unseemly to me about people on the zip line. I think there should have been a way to honor what was happening, and at the same time for the ship to kind of keep its economic commitment. And so I'm a pro-business person, and I think that Royal Caribbean made the right decision, but I think that it probably could have executed this a little bit better. And I think not doing the onshore recreation part probably would have been appropriate. Anyway.
I agree. It's sort of kind of hypocritical, the idea that you're going to help by not going. But I think you have if you're going to go. And I actually would direct this ire as much at the passengers as at the CEO. I mean, you're looking at it as sort of a case study in the business managing itself. But you wonder. I mean, I think the way at least I heard it, is that among the ship there was not a mutiny, but some people on ships that had already left port said, they're uncomfortable, going to Labadie. I think to advise the company, but the company, if all those things that you said are true, then they should organize. And there are in fact, well-meaning revelers who take the Haitian tragedy seriously. I'm sure a shipload of them could be felt to have some kind of it's like ecotourism, right? Sort of like there could be some responsible way to do it, but to try to sort of convert what's basically a bacchanal into some kind of like momentary sort of like let's have a moment of silence. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Right. Well, there were other little quibbles I had too with the whole thing. Like,
I thought it was weird that they got Clinton to praise it unequivocally, though. I'm saying it because I wrote a piece. I'm conflicted, but he didn't say like they did it responsibly. Let me explain why. He was like, it's great. They're back in. Dennis O'Brien, Digicel, they're wonderful. And I did pick up on this without trying to be anti-Clinton. I think that there is a need to oversee these things. I'm sure he's a very rah-rah person, and it's like Jimmy Carter. There's a history of sort of, I can't imagine Jimmy Carter in his post-presidential days becoming a pitch man for corporate interests.
Right.
But this was the
I wanted
tenor
to just
of
mention
today's
that the company also seems to be pretty close to someone named Leslie Voltaire, who's has been described in the media as Haiti's special envoy to the UN. Is that their perm rep to the UN?
Say again. No, I don't.
Voltaire? I didn't look up.
I would definitely remember if there was a Voltaire in the house.
There's some Haiti's envoy to the UN that didn't seem quite. I don't know. But I mention it to you.
Sure.
Check the Guardian article because this person's clearly also advancing Royal Caribbean's interests. And maybe that person has a relationship with her. I don't know.
It was just kind of and again, I think that, you could see Ban Ki-moon was sort of beaming because it's probably, it's his highest profile, special envoy. And, the sort of the elephant in the room is that Obama has also named Clinton as well as George W. Bush as his envoys to Haiti. So you have Clinton in this weird position where it's pretty clear that sort of, the Clinton-George W. Bush angle is not really working with the UN. That's the assumption, Then again, Clinton himself is. So it's sort of like, Clinton was asked, like, so what charity should people give to? And he's like, things that are active on the ground, and he named Partners in Health and World Vision, and he said, and like our organization. So okay, fine, but the I don't know. We'll see whether it's the same. I think before our break, we were talking about the IMF loan. It's one of these things where it's always I definitely see out there and know people sort of it's hard for kind of long-term progressives. The earthquake kind of erases all of the history, and it's presented as this very the United States means well, and then you have some people with saying the IMF destroyed the rice industry in Haiti, and the U.S. Kidnapped Aristide. So there's a lot of whereas like the ship issue, and I think and the IMF loan, you get into these are kind of progressive politics in the midst of the earthquake. And I don't know. I was just surprised.
It's really fascinating, and frankly, it's a huge coup for Royal Caribbean if they got an ex-president to stand up at the microphone.
It is a coup, and I would hate to think.
I
think someone might want to look closely at the 990s of the Clinton Foundation.
I don't want to get too. Look.
No, I said look. Did I say fine? But I'm serious. Like I think when a high-profile person, or maybe I'm a stickler for sort of UN cameras, but it's the thing here was not filmed. This was a stakeout. I guess let me put it. I don't actually think it was filmed by any private television companies, all filmed by the UN. So he really is a sort of a UN bully pulpit. And I think when corporate names, cross the microphone, you've got to ask yourself,
no, you do. We've talked
what's
about
going
this.
on.
Absolutely.
In fact, did we talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken? I think we
we've talked about Kentucky Fried Chicken. We've talked about Well, maybe this is is this a good segue to speaking of development aid and the progressive view to the David Brooks op-ed? Should we?
Oh my gosh! I'm sure. I just want to say one before because I want to make. I think I meant to say it when I said that the UN headquarters there. They were paying rent of $94,000 a month on it. There's this issue which the UN has a system called MOSS. It's minimal operational safety standards, and it was implemented essentially after the Baghdad bombing of the UN's headquarters in Baghdad, where a truck bomb came through a wall. Blew up a building. The building collapsed. A very respected UN official, Sergio de Mello, died, as well as many other UN staff in the building. This is obviously a more deadly one. But since then, the UN has said repeatedly that safety of staff comes first. All buildings will be inspected to make sure they're MOSS compliant. And once the building collapsed, and obviously many buildings in Haiti collapsed, so that's a given. It was raised to me by UN sources that this building was not MOSS compliant. And I looked into it, and there's a procurement item in the budget for 2009, basically $400,000 to try to make the building MOSS compliant. Now, again, it's like at every turn you have to say, that's okay, would the building have fallen down otherwise? Maybe. I know a reporter that went down to Ban Ki-moon and said buildings around it were actually still standing.
Really?
But it does.
Wait a minute, back up. Buildings around the UN?
Buildings around the Christopher Hotel were standing. Now that can also be, in all these things you never know. I think the problem that I've had with the UN is in asking this question, instead of answering, and I asked it at a stakeout, the Secretary General, his top peacekeepers there, instead of saying, it's a yes or no question, was the building MOSS compliant? They say, well, the National Palace fell down too. They say, well, we were at the epicenter. Then reporters that I know that went down there said, well, no, Pétionville, where this thing is, it's not at the epicenter at all. It's on the other side of town. Now, again, it doesn't. Was the building totally substandard? I don't think so. But it does. It seems fair to say, if the UN has said worldwide these things must be MOSS compliant, or somebody yesterday said to me, did they even make sure it was to the code as buildings in like the Dominican Republic next door, whereas it was less hit, but like nothing fell, And this maybe that's the segue to the David Brooks thing. But I want to.
Well, that's also a segue to the observation that some people are probably going to be reaching for the phone number of a lawyer.
You'd be. With the UN, it's a hard nut to crack. I just read a story today that people, relatives of people killed in Srebrenica trying to sue the UN have lost at every stage and are now appealing, and they didn't lose because of the facts of the case or a judge found that the UN acted responsibly in that case. They lost simply due to UN immunity, and I think you'd find the same thing here.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So
anyway.
So that's why I think especially my sort of self-serving horn tooting as a journalist is especially when you're dealing with an entity that has no legal accountability.
Right.
They better allow for and just. I think you brought it up. There's been a kind of or maybe this whole, is this Ban Ki-moon's Katrina?
Right.
Which was an issue raised, and the UN is pushing back. They're fast and furious and saying, of course not. I mean, I think even some of the press corps here are like, oh, well, that's an unfair comparison. It's not. I mean, maybe it is too early, as some of them said, to make a comparison. But I think trying to hold like a major institution, no matter how well it says it's trying to do, hold it accountable, especially when it eschews any legal accountability to anyone, I think is key.
Yeah. Well, accountability, that's what we're all about.
All right.
So,
David Brooks.
So the David Brooks op-ed really touched a nerve. It touched a nerve with Matt Taibbi, who's a very provocative journalist and blogger. He posted a piece on True Slant, taking Brooks apart. So Brooks published an op-ed last Sunday, and he basically said he did this very, I thought, broad brushstroke. Now my reaction when I read it wasn't as strong as Matt Taibbi's, but I was a little taken aback by the Brooks. It started out saying
by culture of poverty.
63 people died in Los Angeles, 7.0 earthquake. And maybe we have 50,000 or 100,000 deaths. We don't know how many yet in Haiti. And he so obviously poverty, poor building standards, mass catastrophe. We all can agree to that. It's an obvious comparison. But then he went on, to talk about a culture of poverty, to talk about the role religion played in
voodoo.
Reinforcing that kind of fatalism.
The voodoo reference was a little...
Talked about child-rearing practices, that child-rearing practices are sort of negligent up until...
Negligent and then abusive after 9 or 10 years old.
And where is all this coming from? I mean, this is all in an 800-word op-ed, so it's a lot that he kind of piled in there. And I think in a really callous way, because a lot of these things, and his main point in the body of the op-ed was that our development aid hasn't worked, none of it's worked, and we don't know what works. Now,
I think he said I think he says we do know what works, which is radical intervention to change the culture of
the
poor
Harlem
people.
Children's Zone model.
Yeah, or let's say what was done
model.
to Native Americans or to indigenous people in Australia. I think,
Right. Well, I thought that was just a lot to assert, and I thought it was a very. I just said the word callous. It just struck me as being, as Matt Taibbi wrote, well, the bodies are still warm. You're suddenly attacking Haiti on all fronts.
Sure.
And anyway, so I raised. It was very provocative, and Taibbi's response. I thought it was interesting, and I thought that at the end of Brooks's op-ed, he quotes Sam Huntington, the former Harvard political scientist who anyone who went through school when I did had to read on realism and he quotes him sort of in the context of Huntington as a cultural anthropologist, which of course he's not.
I'm torn between two tangents, but one's more pressing, so I'm going to go with this one. And the theme or connector here is the callous New York Times. As some may have seen, with as you said, the body's no longer warm, but certainly in mass graves in Sri Lanka. The New York Times named Sri Lanka as the place to go for vacation in 2010.
Yes, I saw that, and I thought of you.
Bringing down the wrath of MIA. But also, I mean, it really, I don't know what's happening with the New York Times. I know they want to start charging for their content, All I can say is, you can keep it. I mean, that was, and there has been, even though it's not, I don't want to be Johnny One Nut on that, but in terms of following up, on Sri Lanka, there's an election coming up. Certainly by the next time we talk, an election will have taken place. It's a very sad election for some in Sri Lanka because the two main candidates are either the president that ordered the pretty human rights controversial attack on the northern Sri Lanka, or the general who carried it out, who's since broken away from the fold and sort of said mea culpa, but said, yes, his army may have shot surrendering LTTE members, but it was on the orders of the president's brother. The UN had said that it would follow up on all this. Ban Ki-moon said he took a personal interest and would be seeking both accountability and a more open political process. Now his own advisor, Philip Alston, has issued a report saying that this footage that came out in October of Sri Lankan soldiers killing naked, bound people is authentic and that Ban Ki-moon should send a team to Sri Lanka to investigate. Ban Ki-moon is not sending a team and has pointed out that Philip Alston is not the UN, is independent, and it has declined to send election observers, and all, it's just sort of, again, this explains, I'm skeptical to some degree about the UN's response in Haiti, simply having seen up close and day by day a pretty clear kind of whittling off the hook of even living up to the commitments that they've made in Sri Lanka. So I'm sorry to be on that soapbox.
Okay, no, I think that's fair. I'm glad you got Sri Lanka in there.
Do you agree on vacations? Maybe Royal Caribbean. I'm going to try to tie the two stories together. Maybe they should go in there.
I don't think we should hold the New York Times travel editors responsible for reading all UN reporting on human rights abuses in Sri Lanka.
I think so. I do. I disagree entirely. I think when you're an elitist travel magazine that is directing, or claiming to have influence over the spending of all the arguments that are made of the benefits of tourism, I think they absolutely have a duty. It's totally tone deaf to list Sri Lanka as the place to visit in 2010, unless you have a whole 1,000-word essay explaining why we understand it's controversial, but if you go to these parts and not others, do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And they're building resorts where people died on the beach. There's no question about it, and it's some people say that's why they did the assault, but I choose to believe that tourism is not that vicious. The other tangent, I'm sorry, I'm going to have my cake with you too, is cultural anthropology. And just this will take us totally off, it's even off politics, but Brooks's invocation of culture, basically he was like saying, what's different about Haiti and Dominican Republic? Well, the Haitians have like a culture that's against success and achievement, and something about voodoo. So I'm not surprised. I'm surprised he's not being, picketed daily. But then again, I think of this anthropologist, Oscar Lewis. Do you know about these controversies? He may be long dead. For some reason, in my mind, he's a big figure. He wrote La Vida, which was about Puerto Rico. And it's a very novelistic anthropology book that, I thought it was very, not sympathetic. I thought it was actually a pretty sympathetic portrayal of a admittedly somewhat pathological family in Puerto Rico, like, going after sailors and stuff. But to many people, he's like the ultimate racist because he sort of tried to analyze how these patterns were passed down from mother to daughter. I guess the analysis may be racist, but to me, the kind of the reporting, it is what it is. Like, if that happened, I don't know. I just always think it's just that David Brooks is not reporting at all. He's sitting on 43rd Street saying voodoo made you, voodoo killed you. Don't blame us. And who knows? What I want to know is, where is David Brooks going on vacation in 2010? Is it Sri Lanka? Could it be, Haiti?
All right. So are we in agreement that David Brooks was totally off base? Because I don't think he was totally off base.
He should have just stuck to the building codes. And then we could say, absolutely.
He should have stuck to the building codes.
I just, on my way back here, I was saying to a UN official who was bragging about money they're raising from private foundations for Haiti. Like, somebody needs to really, and it might be, as a word that Brooks used, paternalism. It might be paternalism to say, this aid is conditioned on, not conditioned. We're giving the aid.
Yeah, well,
but we're going to build fewer buildings, but we're going to build them more securely.
Right.
The last thing
see, to me, the big point that the Brooks column missed is that Haiti is emerging from its basket case status. And all signs, I thought, over the last 24 months were that things are getting gradually, slowly better. The political situation has stabilized. There are a couple of small, maybe tiny bright spots in the economy, Royal Caribbean and a cell phone company, and maybe, I don't know, something else.
Even if it were still a basket case, the idea of saying we're going to blame, your culture and way of life on your poverty, and the answer is sort of a shock doctrine of changing your ways. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't think they should only be immune from that because they may or may not have been exiting basket case strategy.
Anyway. Afghanistan is a basket case country, too, in many ways. But I don't
you'll love this.
David Brooks wouldn't have written such a culturally insensitive column. At least I don't think he would have.
Bill Clinton, back to Haiti, since it's the topic of certainly of the week, the Bill Clinton has been put sort of in charge of what the UN is calling its Cash for Work program, which was announced yesterday by the UN Development Program. And involves, and it's not to take, it involves payment as they described it, paying $5 a day and putting essentially Haitian youth and young men and women to work, clearing up. And I think, again, I asked without any rancor.
Now you're in favor of that.
I don't know how you come up with the $5 number. I just want someone to explain. It was, right? Obviously we're always talking about like $1 a day is abject poverty.
I think I read something that like the average wage in Haiti is $2 a day, so $5 a day is more than doubling that.
I understand. At least I think the question's got to be asked when you're saying this is the great panacea. Why not $3 then? Why not $2.50?
No one's suggesting it's a great panacea, but as a short-term, immediate, get money in the hands of people who need it and start clearing the rubble, it seems like a win-win situation.
But here was the irony to me. So Bill Clinton was talking up his new role for cash for food. or excuse me, not cash for food, cash for work. There's also food for work, which is much more problematic, sometimes used in Burma to make people build roads for the military. No question, no kidding.
Okay.
But he said, we Americans have some great models from Afghanistan. We can put to work in Haiti. And I was just flabbergasted that nobody burst out laughing. It's like the idea that oh yeah, this is great. The reconstruction of Haiti will learn great lessons from America's success in Afghanistan. I mean, I'm asking. I don't know. I'm not. Maybe there's some great cash for work that I've been missing.
Maybe some opium crops need planting.
I don't know. It just was. It's just again, it's like accountability.
All right. Okay. But look, Matthew. It sounds like a really good idea. Can you say
don't
like
get. No, I know, absolutely. No, and I mean, it's not even a new idea. I mean, they do it after almost all disasters. It's just sort of weird that it's being rolled out as like this. No, it's absolutely. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. In fact, my hope would be that of the money that's going to flow in, that a much smaller percentage goes to international consultants. You know what I mean? I mean, I think the whole principle here is whether or not every project works out, at least people in Haiti should be getting something, and it should be the people that need the most help, and not. I mean, let me just say this: the individual to whom the UN was paying $94,000 a month for the Hotel Christopher is a Haitian doctor that it seems to me is living in Miami. So, I mean, my whole thing is it's not even first do no harm. It's like at least make it. The UN, neither the UN nor many of these people can 100% guarantee that their interventions are going to go positively, but at least you can try to leave a mark. At least somebody that needed something, even if it's only your own staff. I mean, that's why I'm saying charity begins at home. The UN, for its own national staff, should have been much more aggressive in finding out if they were alive and making sure they're treated equally. You know what I mean? It's sort of like they jumped ahead and said, well, we're not only concerned about ourselves, but it's like, well, you've already been concerned about your international staff. Now suddenly the focus has turned outward, and what about this intermediate group, which is your own national staff? They're Haitians. They're missing. What's up? What of them? So I like your idea. I'll try to raise that flag over here. Some kind of if the UN won't do it, let the public at large.
Yeah. Well, all right. Should we move on to Afghanistan?
I was thinking. Please go ahead.
It's fascinating how we've talked a lot about how one of the things that we're a little bit uncomfortable with at the UN is how old faces, how there's a lack of fresh blood sometimes in leading big ticket items at the UN.
Yep.
And I think we have another example of this.
We do, and it's even uglier than you presented.
I don't know. You don't know what I'm going to mention, though.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to Mistura.
I'm talking about him.
Okay.
And see, when I was working at the UN in the 90s for the UN Special Commission overseeing the disarmament of Iraq, I happened to be there when de Mistura had played a very bit part. It was like a very kind of 5-minute walk-on role in the whole Iraq WMD narrative. Mm-hmm. But he left an indelible impression, and it was not a favorable one.
Give me some adjectives.
Oh, it's hard for me to be personal, to get personal. Well, look.
Well, the New York Times has called him a faceless bureaucrat.
No. Look, the guy, this was in the 90s. I don't know what he looks like now. I don't know what his whole affect is. But all I can say is that, and I can refer people to the book about this period that Richard Butler wrote, too, which has some other descriptions of him. But, the guy was kind of a dandy. He was this highly polished. This is a certain subspecies of diplomat at the UN. You find this kind of highly. The Americans do not produce diplomats like this. It's only a kind of. It's only a European thing, and pocket square, just so pressed, just. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Sure, I know what you're talking about.
Certain look. And maybe there's a little substance there, but you get the impression that this person doesn't really roll up his sleeves all that much and get into it.
This is the ugly part. Here's what Mr. de Mistura, and then we'll say what his job is going to be as announced January 28th. We're saying this in advance. De Mistura's rise to power has been fueled by hiring the sons and sons-in-laws of powerful UN officials.
Not more nepotism.
It began. Oh, absolutely. It began with, by all accounts, his hiring of the son of Iqbal Riza, who was the chief of staff of Kofi Annan.
Yes, and he and Iqbal Riza were the three of them were like best friends.
Stefan de Mistura hired him. It's actually illegal under UN rules to have both parent and child working for the organization at the same time. And so Iqbal Reeves' son was paid under another name. But everyone knew that he was working there. And I'm going to have this is actually taking place in the Ban Ki-moon circle in Cote d'Ivoire. I'll get to that in a second. But his more recent and more controversial, or also maybe more defensible hiring was of the son-in-law of the current Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. The son-in-law is a former Indian military man, Siddharth Chatterjee. Mm-hmm. And soon after Ban came in, the hiring was made of Siddharth Chatterjee as the chief of staff and sort of number 2 to Staffan de Mistura in Iraq.
Right.
And there was some press coverage. I wrote about it. The Washington Post wrote about it. And this was one of the first freakouts by Ban Ki-moon. It's totally unfair. He's extremely qualified. That's not why he got the job. They sort of claimed that it wasn't a promotion when it was clearly a promotion. To try to get away from it being a promotion, they downgraded the post. But as soon as the heat was off, it got re-upgraded. And ever since then, when de Mistura left the Iraq post, in the UN system, a job was invented for him. As sort of a previously non-existing deputy post at the World Food Program was existing. Now, the reason that it's sort of his investment, as we might say, is paying off is with the UN slated to appoint a successor to Kai Ida, the controversy-plagued head of the UN mission in Afghanistan, accused by his own number 2 of hiding electoral fraud by Karzai, as the U.S. did too. You know, we won't.
Well, this is the thing. So he's the new head of Afghanistan, and my first thought is he really the right person for this job? Like, totally. I understand. He comes from the UN system. We've already talked about how sometimes you got to have an operator who knows his way around.
He's an operator, right?
Yeah.
He's a real operator,
right? But I mean, I think that there's a positive side of being an operator who knows your way where the bodies are buried and get stuff done. But he's a different kind of operator.
He's hiring the bodies.
And this is what disturbs me about
hiring
this.
the deadwood.
It's not an inspired, thoughtful. Is this person bringing the kind of substantive knowledge, can-do, ingenuity to this job? No.
Here's a weird inside baseball part of all this.
Yes, it's a weird inside baseball.
No, I'm going to go even further inside the baseball. Thusly, it was rumored that he would be getting this job. Then it was rumored that that he would be getting the job, but it was rumored, this is before anyone wrote it, Inner City Press wrote it, that there were 3 finalists for the job. Jean-Marie Guénaud, previous head of peacekeeping, Ian Martin, previous head of the UN mission in Nepal and also previously with Amnesty International, and Staffan de Mistura, cooling his heels in an invented and some say no-show job at WFP in Rome. And the New York Times, out of the blue, chimed in, I believe it was New Year's Day, saying, most Americans often don't think of the UN in Afghanistan, but the post could be important, and of the 3 candidates, Guénaud is the best, and de Mistura is a faceless bureaucrat. And the UN, again, kind of freaked out, because, as they said, and it's true, the New York Times wouldn't normally editorialize. This wasn't an op-ed. It was literally like an unsigned editorial, although I believe I know who wrote it, a guy named Mr. Unger, retired. And the question was, how could they write this? And so this is the kind of inside baseball that people like around here, is most people said, this is Holbrooke. In the sense of, the idea is Holbrooke definitely put Peter Galbraith, the number 2 under Kai Ida, in the position, said, this is my guy, hire him.
Okay.
But thus discrediting himself when Peter Galbraith, from many people, at a minimum, either he's a whistleblower or he flamed out in disloyalty. But anyway, it didn't work out and make anyone look good, because Galbraith's position didn't even end up being the U.S. position, right? So if he was a U.S. plant, he blew up in everyone's face.
Okay.
So the question is, how could Holbrooke now, with a straight face, put forward another candidate? Well, he can't do it directly, and so the idea is he pulled the strings. And here's the ultimate. That's all fine. Mm-hmm. On sometime in early January, I think it was a Friday, whatever the number of the day was, Holbrooke gave a short interview to
Nick,
the cable.
Mommy's on the phone. Hang on just one second.
Sure.
Honey, you've got ink all over you? Yeah, go wash your hands.
That's what they told Richard Holbrooke.
Okay. Permanent food coloring. Okay, just make sure you wipe it on something where it can't be cleaned off. Sorry.
I'm bringing this plane in to the resort landing. That Holbrooke gave an interview to The Cable, blog from D.C., and said, Staffan de Mistura has told me he's gotten the job, and I told him I support him entirely. And this was the first. The UN had been denying totally that. In fact, I think the basis on which you're saying de Mistura is getting the job is Holbrooke saying he's getting the job. The UN still hasn't confirmed it.
Wait, I thought it was confirmed.
It's not confirmed.
I've been reading it everywhere like it's a done deal.
It's confirmed because Holbrooke said on the record that de Mistura told him he has the job. He's been offered the job by the UN.
Okay.
So the idea is that this is the ultimate. Number one, de Mistura, knowing that Holbrooke didn't like him, needing to nail down that support ostensibly before he accepted the job. But number two, Holbrooke saying, I support him entirely, to wipe out the whole wasted effort of the New York Times editorial. Then some say it was the UN mission to the U.S. that planted the editorial. But somebody definitely planted it, because if the New York Times doesn't even know there was a war in Sri Lanka, I fail to believe that they know who's getting the UN post. I mean, they have very good reporters, but I'm just trying to tie those two stories together.
All right, anyway, so maybe the de Mistura thing is to be continued.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
At the risk of, I just have to, and I'm sorry, but I made this one reference, and this is the problem at the UN. There is a rule. The rule says father and son, nephew shall not work at the same time. But there's 101 loopholes, one of which was exposed today. A close associate of Mr. Ban Ki-moon is Mr. Choi. He's the special representative of Ban Ki-moon in Ivory Coast.
Okay.
He's actually a pretty deft diplomat and speaks a mean French.
Okay.
And can deal with the strongman Gbagbo.
What's his?
He's South Korean.
South Korean speaks
Mr. Choi, pronounced Che.
Yeah.
And it's not just that he happens to be South Korean. He's close with Mr. Ban, and when he got the job in Cote d'Ivoire, people said, "Jesus, can you just give a country to your friend?" But some said maybe it's important because maybe this means he's committed. Ban will pay more attention to Cote d'Ivoire.
Okay.
About 3 weeks ago.
And I don't know if being the Cote d'Ivoire, is that like a present? Okay, but anyway.
No, it is. No, it's the special representative. It's any place the UN has a peacekeeping mission. Yeah. They appoint a kind of viceroy.
Yeah,
he's the viceroy.
Okay, so
and 3 weeks ago, a UN source told me Mr. Choi, spelled Choi, has his nephew working in Ivory Coast, and we learned about it, and he has it. So I asked I asked the advisor to Ban Ki-moon, who's also South Korean, please, I don't want to say it publicly, just get me a yes or no. Refused. Asked the spokesperson's office. They said, go and ask the Ivory Coast mission's spokespeople. I did. I waited 2 weeks, and they came back and they said, no nephew of Mr. Che works for the mission. And I said, I didn't ask currently, I said, now or in the past, anywhere in Ivory Coast for the UN, does the nephew work? No answer. Today, he's doing a stakeout about Ivory Coast, and I asked Mr. Che, I'm sorry to ask you, but does your nephew, has he worked in Ivory Coast for the UN? He said, yes, he has. And I want to explain it. He's an American nephew of mine, a graduate of Harvard, he said, and he decided to leave his well-paid investment banking job to work for UN volunteers in Ivory Coast.
Oh, wait a minute. Well, something doesn't smell right about this.
Isn't it? No, he went out, so the idea is, wait, if he went to CUNY, it could be nepotism, but since he's foregoing all this money.
He went to Harvard, and he was at Goldman Sachs, and then
he was in Ivory Coast, which is, of course, an up-and-coming economy. But the killer to me was that his position was, because he didn't work directly for the peacekeeping mission, but only for UN volunteers, which is like a parallel structure in the country, then, of course, it couldn't be corrupt. So I went to the noon briefing, and I said, what is the UN policy on father and nephew, or, nephew and uncle working in the structure? And they said, well, he's answered you, and there's no connection between the two structures. And the reality is this other UN official, nepotism case number 3, Alan Das, brought in family members to Liberia when he was the head of the Liberian mission, which is a non-family mission, meaning you're not supposed to bring family members. It's too dangerous. And he did it through UNV. He got them all UNV contracts. So the idea is that the UN to be saying that these are, maybe this is way too inside baseball for you, but the problem is, it's not, when people hear, that somehow nepotism at the UN, there are defenders of the UN, some of whom I know, who are like, oh no, that's all rumor, it's never true. And it's like, this is true. The guy admitted it on freaking camera.
I think nepotism, it's wrong. I don't think we need to dress it up or make it seem like anything it's not. It's wrong.
Exactly. And it's so easy. It's a big world. If this guy's the investment banker, let him go work for the UN elsewhere. I'm sure Mr. Che could pull the strings for that.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's not even a bad diplomat. I wanted to go out of my... I think he literally believes he's doing good by bringing... nobody except his Harvard investment banking nephew could do it. But it's the same thing with Ban Ki-moon. The son-in-law should just stand down for a few years. It's an enormous world. If he's as talented as is claimed, he'll rise elsewhere. You know what I mean? But when you're promoting your own immediate relatives through the system, that's all funded by public money, it's ludicrous to think that people won't ask about it.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that's not a very spurring
listen,
conclusion.
I'm really glad that you're there doing the work of uncovering this. What I don't want is for this to overwhelm and obscure other important things that the UN is doing.
I agree. I totally agree. That's why they should just cut it out. Just cut it out, and then go and do God's work.
Yeah, or as we've talked about it before, fess up to it and move on.
I mean,
what's really stupid about all of these cases that you brought up, there's like 5 of them in the last 6 months.
Yep.
They're so lame. I mean, as you just said, if you want to hire a relative, like make them work in some other side of that. Exactly. I mean, do it.
There's so many ways to do it. You can also make a double switch and have them. You know what I mean? There's just any number of ways.
Not that that's okay. Not that we're suggesting that that's how it ought to be.
That they should be evasive. No, I agree. And the thing is, I don't view these stories as anti-UN. I mean, most of them are leaked to me by UN people that work for the UN and like the UN.
Most of them are leaked to you. Let's just be honest. Most of them are leaked to you by people who are pissed off that they're not getting promoted or getting the opportunity.
Obviously, the motives of whistleblowers are legion. But
yes.
I try to not be naive, but there are people who work for the UN and believe in its principles and are disappointed and disillusioned by how it's being led at the top.
Right.
And I think that is a motive often, sometimes,
Yes.
Anyway, a document is a document.
A document is a document.
And a Haitian vacation is a Haitian vacation. Just ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so I think we've about exhausted our list. I know.
Okay.
I know.
We could exhaust more, but I think we've exhausted our time.
Yeah, we've exhausted our time. I have a giant science project that went awry. Clean up,
I thought it was ink on the hands.
Well, there was. I don't know. There's some volcano contraption ink. Anyway, I can't wait.
It sounds like quite a scenario.
All right. Well, thanks.
I hope we don't have to make a flash appeal for you.
No.
Okay.
No. All right. We'll talk later. We have a lot. We didn't talk about.
I know. There's a lot of issues in the
There's like a
Western
lot of stuff.
Sahara. There's many issues warming up in the Gulf.
The Afghanistan, London meeting next week.
You know it. Yemen. We haven't even touched Yemen.
We didn't talk about Yemen.
I don't think we've even mentioned Yemen on these UN Plaza.
All right.
So,
well,
I'm sure the alternative, the parallel universe of UN Plaza, I'm sure is all over Yemen. So.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Okay,
Talk to you
Jackie.
later, man.
Good luck with the volcano.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.